Well, welcome back, everyone. I say welcome back because it was May the 17th, wasn't it, when we had our very first in-person Human Capital and Education Group event in Jakarta, and fantastic attendance on that day, and we've got the same today. So thank you very much for everyone that's tuned in. And you'll notice that we're taking up what we said at that event, particularly what Ollie and I said in terms of follow through on the whole question of talent acquisition, selection, development, and retention. And at that event, it was in the context of developing global ready future leaders for Indonesia, but global ready applies really to every person that's in the workplace, and that's because businesses are looking for the Holy Grail. And what is the Holy Grail? What are businesses after? Well, they used to just be after profitability. However, that's not good enough anymore because of the whole disruption and change that's happening in our world. So now then they're looking for how to sustain profitability. And so not just in the short term, but medium and long term. And the challenge gets even broader than that, because with new reporting requirements, they now will have to look at sustaining their communities within which they operate, and indeed their environment, their local and contributions to the global environment as well. So this search for excellence contains those three elements. And meanwhile, of course, we have disruptions. We have disruptions to all those elements. So we have disruption to business, more recently, COVID and supply chain crisis. We have disruption to communities through war and displacement. We have disruptions to the environment and noticeable impacts of climate change, for example. So, within this context, there are huge churns and turnovers and reorientations around jobs, skills, careers. It's really, really in turmoil. And I guess we're not going to solve all those issues today. And to be able to come up with some solutions, you need data. You need rich data. And I'm delighted to tell you that Ollie and team have put together a fantastic report with really, really clear data about this whole question of the trends around talent. So without further ado, I will hand over to Ollie and the team. And please ask questions. Please make contributions. It's a thought leadership piece for all of us. No one has all the answers. So let's try and work on this challenge together. Ollie, over to you, please.
Thank you, Paul. It's nice to be back on familiar territory. For those who aren't aware, I was the previous chairman of the British Chamber of Commerce, handed over to Pac Donny about a month or so ago. So I was very much at the embryonic stages of this focus group when we initially set it up, and delighted to see how active, as Paul has said, it's become. And I think, if I'm right in saying, it's the focus group in the chamber which has the most members, which reflects, I suppose, the types of topics which are being discussed. And hopefully today we can cover some of those. And I think human capital will clearly underpin whatever plans Indonesia has for growth in whatever areas, whether that be sort of pivoting to new markets, change management, responding to pandemics and everything else. So a lot to cover, not a huge amount of time. So I would encourage, if there are themes you want to explore further, do reach out to myself or the team for sort of continued conversations around that. On that note, a quick introduction to the panel. We have Cecilia Cristanto, who is part of my senior management team in Jakarta, heads up our finance, financial services and technical disciplines. We also have alongside Abed, who heads up our technology and healthcare life science practices. So quite a decent spread. Every time I think we're over pandemic, something surprises me. So the other panelist we had has gone down with COVID yesterday. So true to form. So I shall step in for any related topics around that. So hopefully across the three of us, we shall give you our wise opinions, having spent combined, I think it is, without giving ages away, about 30, 40 years in the executive search space. Handing over as well to Adrian, who is our head of marketing strategy across APAC, which is 12 countries for us, and very much the editor-in-chief of the report we're going to give you some sort of pieces from. It's a very comprehensive report. It's the most in-depth report we've ever conducted, and we have done these types of reports for many years across a lot of locations. So this is a step into a different realm for us, and Adrian's been very much key to that. So I'm going to hand over to him to sort of talk you through it. So you'll hear his voice quite a bit, because a lot of the information has been collated and scrutinized and analyzed and presented through Adrian and his team, which I hope you find useful. The information is available. So if you haven't seen it yet, either reach out to us or it is on the Michael Page website as well. So Adrian, I'm conscious of time. I shall hand over to you, sir.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We've got some really exciting information to share with you today. It's a really rich view that I think is quite rare to find from a data perspective in Indonesia. So we're really excited to present this to you today. Everything you're going to see today in terms of the stats we're going to present are specific to Indonesia. And you're going to see a lot of potentially bold numbers come through. And we'd encourage you, as you see them, to use the discussion, the chat function of Zoom to share what's standing out to you. If you're surprised or shocked to see something, let us know. That's what the chat function is for. And no doubt you're going to have some questions throughout, and we certainly encourage you to submit them. Please use the Q&A panel within the Zoom menu to submit those questions. And we'd encourage everybody who's watching right now to keep an eye on those questions. And if there's something that you see that somebody submits that you'd really like to hear more about, please upvote that. Go ahead and like it. We're sure to see quite a few questions. We won't be able to cover all of them, and seeing which ones you're interested in help us do exactly that, so we can prioritize. And you're free to also submit questions anonymously if you prefer to. So go ahead and do that. Now, if you haven't yet seen the report, it's called The Great X. And the reason why we've called this report The Great X is you're bound to have seen headlines and stories about the Great Resignation. Sometimes it's called the Great Attrition, the Great Reevaluation. There's a lot of terms for it out there in the media right now. Our focus in this report is not to take a stance in any of these. It's not deterministic, determined by the media what you're going to experience in the year ahead. Ultimately, it's the policies and decisions and actions you take as a company that are going to determine what you experience. And the aim of this report is to give you the right information and insights to help you guide the right decisions to make over the coming months, to perhaps prevent a great resignation and turn into a big opportunity for you, and turn it into a great attraction, and really help you make the most out of the year ahead. Now, what you're going to see our conversation today centered around are 4 key parts, and we call this our talent quotient. Over the last 2 years, talent attraction and retention have just become so much more complex. And that's what our report aims to do now, is to dig into the deep areas we need to. So we're going to start off today's conversation about talent retention. There's going to be some surprising figures there. And then you're going to be really hungry to find out how to attract talent. What are the right levers to pull on? And there's also some interesting bits in there. And then both company culture and employee experience are 3rd and 4th sections of today's conversations. They're going to help you dig even further into retention and attraction. And we're going to have some really interesting conversations around those too. We're going to kick right off with talent attraction. Now, one of the very first questions we asked participants in this survey, and again, this was carried out throughout APAC, but the numbers you're about to see are Indonesia specific, and we're very happy with our sample size, well over 1,000, across multiple sectors, industries, job functions, levels of seniority. So really robust data set. So we're quite confident in the data you're going to see. But the first question we asked then is, what's the market talent migration scene looking like? What does it look like over the last 2 years? And remarkably, we found a really strong correlation between the pandemic and job migration. Almost 1 in 2 people in Indonesia have joined a new company in the last 2 years. So pretty big migration movement. The biggest segment was those who've been employed by their company for less than a year, almost 1 in 5 people. And this is relative to the rest of APAC on par, round about the average in the middle. You're going to see shortly what that number looks like in the coming months. And without giving too much away, it changes. And I think this is the first area that I'd like to chat to you, Ollie, about. What do you think has changed, and how do you think the pandemic has contributed to this talent migration? 43% starting a new gig in the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's obviously a question we ask ourselves a lot, because we're also a company trying to keep our talent and develop it as well. I think what COVID has done is enable people to have a reset and a proper think about things in terms of where they're going, where their career's going. Some have held tight because of the uncertainty around it, and we're now seeing those people becoming a little bit more proactive in their job search. So they're sort of held tight for a couple of years and wanted to move. Others have used it as an opportunity, and Abed will talk about this at some point. The tech space has really blossomed during COVID. And what's interesting, we went into COVID as a company globally concerned about what that might mean. Do we need to downsize? Do we need to sort of make adjustments? And in the last 2 years, we've had our record ever numbers. So we're still, I think, trying to work out exactly why that is. But what it has done is created new markets, companies having to pivot, a lot of companies having to go from through transformation and transitions, which creates obviously a lot of opportunity, particularly relevant to the millennial Gen Z community as well, which in Indonesia is a big chunk of the workforce. So a combination of factors which have created some dynamics which a lot of companies have taken advantage of. Others have clearly struggled to sort of pivot towards. Post-pandemic is the conversation we're now having, and as I just said, that doesn't seem to be completely over, and there's all sorts of other situations going on in the world which now are affecting longer term decisions as well. But we are sort of aware that what the pandemic has done is really accelerate thinking from a particularly HR perspective around dynamics of the workforce, hybrid working, benefits, a whole range of things which probably needed to happen at some point. It was just triggered by something which none of us wanted to happen.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And I think what's really interesting now is when we start to look at what's coming up. And when we ask people, do you plan on resigning, or do you plan on looking for a new opportunity in the next 6 months? And I mean, we use the word resign, as harsh as it sounds. Indonesia skyrocketed to the top of APAC, right behind India. So when we look at it, 84% of people plan on resigning in the next 6 months. Only 7% of people, respondents, said they do not plan on resigning. Relative to the rest of APAC, Indonesia right at the front, which tells us there was a slight delay with the Great Resignation in Indonesia, as it was with India as well, surprisingly. So a slight lag, which means what a lot of the markets in APAC experienced over the last 2 years, Indonesia's about to experience it in a very big way in the coming months. And because this is such a big number, we're about to switch screens now so you can see the data. Because 84% planned resignations is such a big number, we thought, okay, let's go a bit deeper and make sure this isn't being led by one demographic or another. And what we're finding is it's holding true across industries, levels of seniority, and generations. We're being told by our audience, by candidates, this is universal. So the lowest number was 74 across media and agency, highest in the public sector at 93. Seniority level wise, across the board, prevalent. Generation, again, across the board. We dug a bit deeper and asked people why. Why are you looking at a new opportunity in the next 6 months? And the number one reason, 85% of people say this is the reason why they're looking for a new opportunity, boils down to a big change professionally that they're looking for. This is not the same job at a different company. This is a change in career, a change in role, perhaps even a change in industry altogether. So a big reason for leaving, big change, is ultimately what people are looking for. So this leaves the big question of, how do we prepare for this? This is a big change required. It's not as simple as, increasing somebody's salary or promoting them. We have to anticipate bigger professional shifts that our talent is looking to make. So, Ollie, I come back to you and just ask, for those on the call, they're likely to see this and go, well, okay, well, how do I prepare for this? What are some effective strategies that I can take to be more proactive? Because once cognitively, behaviorally, this is set into a candidate's mind, it's so hard to shift them away from this thinking and keep them within the company. So the question is, what are those effective strategies to help us mitigate this?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is I wouldn't take that 84% of people looking for a new job in the next 6 months too literally. What it does say, I suppose, is that 84% of people are unhappy enough to say they would look for an opportunity. It doesn't mean they will go and move. We also know, and having recruited in Indonesia for 8 years or so, there is a culture of people being always open to an opportunity. We very rarely have people saying, look, I'm not looking at all. Everyone's open to an idea. So I would just put that into some kind of context. What it does create is obviously either opportunities from a talent acquisition perspective. So if you are looking to hire right now, there's obviously an appetite for people to make moves, and that sort of broadens your potential candidate pool. But clearly on the other side of that creates a retention challenge, as you say, in terms of how do you get ahead of the curve, which I imagine is a conversation a lot of HR directors and country heads are having right now in terms of how do we future-proof our business. A long topic and lots of things within that. But one thing I would say is the motivations of why a candidate would move and what they're looking for in that move, which are well documented in this report, are well worth looking at. For example, personal well-being is now a fairly decisive part of a decision-making process for a lot of candidates, whereas previously it would have been very binary: salary, title, and potential opportunities beyond. Now people are looking for those companies which have a defined work-life balance plan or flexi working plan, whatever you'd like to call it. And we are finding that candidates are asking that question pretty early on in an interview process: is what is the company's strategy? Is that likely to change? Are they going to force people back into the office and make it compulsory? Are they going to stick with a hybrid model? And that's difficult because a lot of companies are pivoting as situations change as well. So the advice we're giving is you have to look at other reasons to someone to join your business other than what traditionally would have been the main motivators to join. And those tend to be more around the softer side of the environment that you're offering.
Yeah, and I think we're going to unpack that pretty soon. There's this big rise in soft motivators, soft attraction levers that are becoming more prominent. So some really interesting stats to come on that. The next thing to look at is a big but. So there's this big drive for professional change, but what our candidates are telling us is they no longer want professional growth at the cost of personal well-being. And again, that's an interesting thing to coincide with the pandemic, when work and life are now forced into the same place. So when we ask people, are you willing to sacrifice a salary increase, promotion, a bonus, so there's those monetary motivators, are you willing to sacrifice that for better personal well-being, greater mental health and happiness? And 68% of candidates in Indonesia said yes, they are willing to sacrifice money for happiness. So really interesting development to come out of that. So to just, I think we need to unpack this number, because some might be surprised to see this. Cecilia, what do you think about this? Is this a surprising number to you, and why or why not? And what do you think has led to a number like this? It's a fairly big cultural shift that's sort of in the backdrop here that we've got to address.
Yeah. Whether I'm surprised, not really, Adrian. This has been a common theme almost in my daily conversation with both clients and candidates. Having through something as big as pandemic for the past 2 years, I think had led many people reprioritize things in their lives: money, purpose, goals, flexibility, mental well-being, happiness, and whatnot. So the pandemic made people take a step back and ask more significant questions, like, why am I doing this job? Is it worth it? What is my purpose? Do I see professional and personal values in what I do daily, monthly, yearly? Is the company vision and values aligned with mine? I think this situation has forced us to think what matters the most at the end of the day, what we are willing to compromise and not. At the end of the day, ultimately, people are aiming for a better quality of life. So of course, money is important, and that is still one of the most, if not the most sought after factors when moving to a new job. But it is evident that most of our respondents say that it is not sufficient to retain them. And therefore, this cultural change or shift is happening, where, as you mentioned, the soft motivators such as personal well-being, mental health, happiness, work balance plays a very big part too in their decisions.
And I think you're spot on, because I mean, we're about to talk about this now, this balance of money versus these soft motivators. So when we move into the next section, all about talent attraction, it's exactly what we see. So when we ask people to, this is candidate focus, we ask them to rank the most important things that attract them to a new company when they're considering a new opportunity. So the numbers you're seeing on the screen here, the percentages, all add up to 100. And this gives you an idea of the power each of these things has. So I think, to your point, it's not surprising that we see salary and monetary remuneration sitting on at the top with 25% strength overall. I think what is interesting is we look at what we call these soft motivators, and there's a big jump up in how important these are becoming, and ties in very nicely to what you're just talking about in terms of personal well-being. So we're seeing it's salary, et cetera, sitting at 25%. Company culture and values, interestingly now, the second most important factor to attract new talent to your company, sitting at 18%, just behind money. And really interesting to that as well is when you start adding up the collective value of these soft factors. 18% for company culture and values, leadership, 8%, greater sense of purpose, 6%. We oftentimes find ourselves in a corner where we can't keep on raising the bar monetarily, but perhaps what we can start doing is focusing on these soft motivators and really using that as a point of differentiator. So I bet I want to speak to you here now about specifically company culture and values, and looking at how close that sits to remuneration. What do you think this speaks to from a candidate mindset? And then, additionally to that, when we look at purpose, what does that mean in real terms for the people on this call, for employers and talent management? How do you connect a company's purpose to an individual?
To put it simply, Adrian, company's culture, values, or let's just call it under the umbrella of purpose.
Yep.
It's an emphasis on belonging, and I think that's something that has been undervalued recently when it comes to talent attraction, whereby over the past few years, the monetary aspect of attraction, right, compensation benefit, has been on the rise, and you could see this. And I work within the tech industry. Within the tech industry, a few years ago, it's all about compensation, whereas now competitors are doing the same. And so the question for a lot of candidates is, all right, if you can't offer me the same compensation, it is almost guaranteed, or with a high probability, that I could look, to get the same across the pond. And so the challenges for a lot of companies is, how do we then make sure that our employee value proposition isn't just communicating the monetary piece, but that purpose piece? And your question is great. Now, how do you align purpose with individual employees? That's incredibly difficult. But from a talent attraction point of view, what I would say is, build team's culture statement. An organization would create visions and mission statement, but that's an organization point of view. What I'm saying here is, when it comes to talent attraction, instead of articulating the company's vision and mission, start also articulating what the team stands for. Mm-hmm. Right? What is important to the team, not necessarily to the company, because what that does is, you are attracting people who then have the same values, aligning the same mission to what they want to do in their function, right? And so making it even more specific, I think that could be a great start.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could probably speak just on this topic alone for an hour. What I would encourage all of you on the call right now, we at Page Group have learned a lot about this topic over the last few years. We've recently published our sustainability report, where it really does show our game plan, how we established our own company purpose, and the steps we had to take as a company to make sure that was lived and breathed by our employees, and they believe it as well. So it's a great case study for anybody interested in a bit of a playbook on how to build that culture and that purpose, and ingrain it within the team. Now, I think what's really interesting is, of course, it's great to see a ranking like this of what's important to candidates. It gets really interesting, though, when you turn the same question onto employers, and that's what we did. We gave all employers in the survey the same question. We said, okay, what do you think candidates rank highly in terms of attraction motivators to join a new company? Not necessarily just your company, any company. And the reason why we wanted to ask that was to understand the delta, the difference between what employers think candidates value and what candidates actually value. It's really interesting results. Maybe might surprise you, maybe it won't. But the most overvalued, so what you're seeing here on the right-hand side, the red section is what employers are overvaluing relative to candidates, and the blue section is what they're undervaluing. Massively, 164% overvalued by employers is the power of their company brand. So this is the traditional external-facing brand. There's a massive over-reliance when we look at this data on employers over-relying on that highly recognized brand name. On average, employers ranked this the second most important thing for candidates. Candidates, on average, ranked this as the 9th most important thing to attract them to a new company. Now, this has obviously some big repercussions across the board, and we're gonna talk about that, especially relative to whether you're a large corporate or a smaller startup. Some big ramifications there, but immediately the big impact here is, by overvaluing company brand so heavily, you undervalue those important soft factors we just spoke about. There's a distraction away from some of those things that could be true differentiators and create a lot of movement in both talent attraction and retention. So an undervaluation of company culture and values by 40%, leadership 36%, greater sense of purpose 30%, and those three things tie very closely together. Now, what I'd love to talk about now, and I think Abed, I think you'd be good to answer some of these, is from a candidate perspective, why don't you think the company brand isn't as important for them anymore. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you think this affects a large corporate versus a smaller startup differently, if it does, around this importance of company brand.
To your first question, why perhaps it's not as important, company brands is not as important for, to the candidates. So before I answer that, maybe let me give a quick definition between the difference of a company brand and talent brand. A company brand is essentially what you want to be perceived.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's messages that are curated, whereas a talent brand comes directly from within. It's a direct experience and feedback. And when a company says what they are, but then it is known to the public that they're not exactly doing what they say they will do, there is a dissonance. And word of mouth spreads very quickly, I guess, in this part of the world. And so when there is that dissonance, candidates now are looking towards actually wanting to know what is the actual experience of working in your company. This can be seen in large corporates versus startup, for example, where perhaps a large corporate company brand could be, hey, we could provide you stability. But truth of the matter is, and perhaps large corporate also find this difficult when attracting, especially with tech talents, is that may not be appealing for tech candidates, where what they're looking for are things like impact, for example, where they know that if they move to a smaller, younger company, to a startup, the talent brand that they could experience are going to be large scale impact across a number of mass users, right? Through the conversations they have with, or through the product that have gone and been released in the market. And so it's really important for any company. Now, it's not just large corporates, it's not just startups, any sizes, to understand and to align between company brands as well as their talent brands.
I love that point about a company brand versus a talent brand. I think that's a huge shift in thinking that all of us have to start being very careful about. That the two types of brands are actually quite different. There are brands externally facing the world that are perceived one way, but very differently by their own internal audience and employees. It's a very valuable point. Thanks for that. And I think to your point, you talk about this dissonance. And interestingly, we already have a question here that I think is about to be answered in the next section. What kind of company culture and values are people looking for? And we're seeing some really interesting movement in Indonesia. And the rise of DE&I as no longer a niche issue. We've always kind of looked at D&I as a thing that impacts certain minority groups, smaller groups within a company. But what we're seeing now from this new survey is it's become a universal issue. It's become universally important. So we ask people, everybody, have you ever asked, or do you plan on asking about a company's DE&I policy? And this is in the interview stage. 66%, that was the average response, said yes, I have asked, or I will be asking in the future. I think really interesting is when you break that number down across different groups. So you can see this on the screen here. So average is 66%. Look at the age range there, right? It is over 60% for all four of our major age generations, from baby boomers all the way to Gen Z. It is becoming, it is sitting in the majority realm. When we break it down across different gender identities, look at men versus women. One might think that DE&I might be more important to women than men in the workplace with regards to gender equality and equity. But in this instance, men and women are looking at it the same way. I'd love to unpack this a bit more in terms of why this universality is sitting there. And I think it's especially more important to discuss when we look at the implications. So not only do majority of people plan on asking, when we ask people, if you are not satisfied with the response to that question, you're not satisfied with the clarity and the impact of that company's DE&I policy, is it enough for you to drop out of the interview process? 1 in 3 people said yes. 33% of people said yes. Now, okay, the majority are still saying no, but when 1 in 3 people are saying yes, that's enough for me to drop out. And many of us are experiencing a talent short market. 1 in 3 is a big number. And again, that consistency in response around different groups is particularly interesting. So, Cecilia, I'd love to speak to you about this. You know, I think it's become very clear and abundant that DE&I is no longer a niche issue. I'd love to get your thoughts on why we're seeing such a large uptick in the importance and the universality of DE&I across so many different candidate groups.
Okay, I think candidates see a clear D&I policy and strategy in the company as a tangible indicator of a company's culture and values. Even those who aren't directly affected by D&I policies, so say that they are the majority, still see this as a positive sign of the company's culture. I've come across some, if not many, candidates who are asking what are the ratios in their management team, in the client's management team, of the expatriates versus locals, of female senior management group in that company. What are their D&I policies that have been implemented? And what are the leaders' action or take on it? So D&I is not just an HR job to implement. I think many candidates, many people right now see that leaders really have to take action on emphasizing or promoting the D&I strategy that they have set in the company. If the leaders are committed to D&I, I think the result will be more positive engagement from people underneath, from people in different departments, different background. Thus, changes or transformation that they are about to implement are more likely to happen on the ground as people will feel more valued, will feel respected and recognized by the leaders.
And I wonder if another aspect to this big uptick and move away from it being a niche issue is maybe that DE&I policy becomes a strong symbol or telltale sign of a company's culture and values in action, right? So a company might say this is our culture and values, but DE&I policy shows how implemented that culture and value system is. And maybe that's why we see men and women often sitting on equal terms in terms of their view on the importance of DE&I. Anybody on the panel want to add to that or have any interesting thoughts around DE&I policy being a bigger symbol for more people on that company culture and values?
Yeah, I think what we've certainly seen at the more senior ends is senior candidates being asked about how they would put metrics in place to enable this change to take place. And that's not just in MNCs. We've seen that across quite a broad spectrum, and that is a shift. I think companies have got to the point where they realize it can't just be talk. It now needs to be taken into reality. So from cosmetic to actual action. Again, that's meant bringing people in with that type of mindset already, which is not easy because this is fairly new for a lot of companies. But sort of putting the metrics behind how you actually move your D&I policy forward, then triggers the whole conversation about the brand itself representing reality rather than what you think it should be. And that's one thing I would certainly have a think about at the senior end of the market is how do you measure D&I? Most companies we see are starting small and then building up from there rather than trying to cover everything at once and diluting the impact.
That's a great point. I think obviously a very strong component linked to DE&I and company culture more broadly is well-being and employee happiness. Now, earlier on, we we talked about that big number, 68% of people willing to sacrifice money for well-being and happiness. Wanted to dive in a little bit deeper here. So we pulled out some really interesting bits. So I don't think it would surprise many of us on this call that over the last 2 years, the majority of our candidates are saying that their workload and their stress load has increased. All right, roughly half the people who participated here said, yeah, I'm more stressed. I have been more stressed over the last 2 years. I think what's really interesting, though, is, when we ask people, okay, well, your workload and your stress load has gone up. Has your company made an extra effort to assist you with this heightened stress load and workload? Only roughly half of people are saying, yes, my company has. So 46% of people. I think more interesting, though, is when we ask people, do you believe that your company cares about your well-being and happiness? I mean, in basic terms, do you think your company cares about you as a person? 58% of people are saying yes. Now, okay, yeah, that's the majority, but 58% on a very basic question, does your company care about you? Is maybe not as high as we'd like to see it. And I think that's especially important when we start to unpack the people that are saying, no, my company doesn't care. So actually, that's exactly what we did. We looked at the people who say their company doesn't care about their well-being and happiness, and we started to look at the difference in responses. So from D&I not being a priority, you can see the red bit on this slide are essentially what we call the unhappy folks, the people who don't think their company cares about their well-being. The blue is the average response rate, so the happy folks, if you will. And you can see big deltas, big differences in the way unhappy people are responding. They are less likely to say that their company values and prioritizes DE&I. They're much more likely to respond that their company did not take active steps to improve work-life balance. Right through to mental health, majority of them saying, no, my company doesn't care about my mental health, and they're not helping me manage heightened stress levels. And to the point where more than half are saying, I'm not comfortable talking about my mental health to HR or even my line manager, my supervisor. And I bet you mentioned earlier on the power of word of mouth and this dissonance and people going out there talking about this. I'd love to hear, again, Cecilia, your thoughts on, yeah, the majority of people are saying that their company cares about their well-being and happiness, but this sizable minority who are saying that they don't. What are the consequences of these unhappy people in the marketplace in such a talent short market? And off the back of that, for the folks on this call who are probably thinking, okay, well, how do you mitigate this? What do I do to fix this problem?
Sure. To answer your first question, the consequences, Adrian, definitely employee disengagement, lower productivity, not only for them, but also for the team, for the company. And the biggest one will be potential resignations. As you mentioned, these people, the unhappy, disgruntled employees, can also spread negativity. Negative word of mouth can destroy the talent brand. It doesn't matter how strong the company brand is. A poor talent brand can hinder talent attraction and break a company's culture. Now, how to fix this issue? First and foremost, I think knowing what makes these employees unhappy is the first step to boosting the overall morale and satisfaction. Make sure that their voices are heard, and take action plans are the next step. You can't please everyone, but especially it's harder to do so when you're a giant corporation. But when the number of unhappy employees is, if they're a sizable minority, say that they're beyond 20%, you may want to make sure that there are some initiatives taking places. It could be as simple as creating an employee survey or creating a cross-functional employee experience team, just to ensure that they reach out to the widest audience and take feedback from various people. A company can also choose to maybe partner up with a third-party provider that has a good employee assistance program. It's good to provide in-moment support for these struggling employees within their day-to-day activities. Having said that, any of these initiatives won't have a positive and lasting fix if the leaders are not constantly promoting a culture of open communication and encouraging their people to speak up. I think that's the most important thing.
Absolutely. And I mean, to your point, sometimes it's the smallest actions that can contribute. For example, one of the things we actually managed to get unhappy people and the average responder to agree on after so much dissonance between these two groups is something as simple as my mental health and well-being is now so important, it is important enough that I need to start seeing it in my performance appraisals and performance measurement. And this maybe not surprising bit, or maybe it is surprising, only 41% of companies have actually started to incorporate that mental health and well-being aspect into appraisals, whereas the majority are not. So again, an example of these small little steps that mean a lot to employees. We're going to move into our last section now, which is all about the employee experience. So when we talk about employee experience, it starts with remuneration. It goes into flexible working arrangements, right down to work-life balance as well. And then we're gonna end off with a quick chat about skills development. I think obviously what's on everybody's mind right now is how do we recalibrate for flexibility, because that is the new normal. So what we wanted to share is what candidates are reporting in terms of what they expect and perceive to be their new normal and what their preferences are. Now, by and large, everybody loved working from home. They have a preference for hybrid work at the office and home working, but in terms of people who really did not enjoy not being in the office, only 4%. So clear expectations here from people, and then this is true across industries, levels of seniority, and age groups, that the hybrid solution works for people. And the good news here is that by and large, people are happy with the flexibility that their companies have provided. So 60% saying happy that my company has been flexible enough. Interestingly, and this is on the higher end for APAC, 15% of people have resigned or plan to resign because of a lack of flexibility brought forward from the company. So an interesting snapshot around how we start planning for flexibility. But I think what I'd love to have a quick discussion around is and sorry, again, just to show everybody here, is this is consistent now within APAC. It's consistent across industries and of levels of seniority and generations. But what I'd like to have a chat about is it's very easy to say hybrid is the future. That is the new normal. But we know that there are going to be many companies who want to revert back to the older way of working as soon as they can. And that's probably because there are so many challenges that come with hybrid working solutions for companies. Ollie, I wonder if you wanted to maybe speak to this about, is this hybrid work situation the new normal? Are companies going to revert to the old way of working? Should they? And then what are those challenges that come with hybrid working solutions that make this less feasible in the long term?
Yeah, I think you've got to be careful what you wish for on this one. That I think there's some quite high-profile companies who came out with some big statements about work from home for the rest of your career, and are now sort of walking that back a little bit, realizing that that's not necessarily the best way to build a productive business. So the first thing we've noticed is companies being a little bit more careful in using this as a branding opportunity and more around what does it actually mean in terms of future-proofing the business. I think there is in certain industries a desire to go back to what it was. I think people are sort of more and more frustrated by the limbo phase. And some companies are saying to us, we'll only take people if they work in the office 5 days a week. And are using their selection process to drive that message rather than making big PR statements around it. You tend to find that's a little bit more maybe in the traditional sectors. It also depends a little bit on the market. If a candidate these days will be far more interested in the technology infrastructure that a company can provide, because that's an indication whether they're willing to invest in a hybrid policy, or it's just a nice thing to say to attract a candidate. But the reality is, it takes you 6 months to get set up properly and everything like that. And my own company is not perfect in that situation either. We feel like we've gone a long way on the technology piece, but as soon as you feel like you've achieved it, then you realize you're behind the curve again. So it is an ongoing challenge. I think in Indonesia, when we look across our 16 offices, whatever it is across APAC, the number of people coming back into the Indonesia office is higher than in other countries, which I do think is partly related to the technology side of it and connectivity, but also the desire to be around and have that social element of the job, which is back to the culture. We are not seeing a huge demand for people to come back in every day. So this sort of hybrid side, where we are seeing some success from companies is making it performance related, which is understandable. So if you're dipping in performance, there is an expectation to come into the office, not to punish you, but to help you be surrounded by people who can help give you that support to then move forward and achieve, which is what most people join a company is to be successful in it. And those performance type conversations are becoming more impactful, I think. So we've moved on from being very hesitant what you can say, what you can't say from that side towards more, well, let's make it around performance. This then comes into appraisal systems and everything else. So we are finding companies who've been very used to having one appraisal a year, very hard to judge the sentiment of your business once a year. So we're seeing companies being more creative, I suppose, in their appraisal policy, which then, if it's every quarter, the questions around the hybrid working model come up more often. And those companies which are giving a voice to their employees tend to get the right result. Those who are trying to purely sort this out at board level only, particularly companies who have regional boards rather than in country, they're the ones who are struggling to sort of find the right balance on this topic.
All right, last topic of the day, and then we're gonna move on to the Q&A section of today's webinar. Very last thing we're going to talk about today is upskilling and reskilling. We saw some interesting bits here. Now, we ask people, how important is reskilling or upskilling yourself in how important is it going to be for your next career move? Virtually everybody said it's critical. 97% said upskilling and reskilling is essential for when I make my next career move, whether it's in the company I'm at or the next company. I think what's really interesting, though, is what we call the democratization of resources when it comes to upskilling and reskilling. Now, yes, official programs you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, official programs.
I assume that's not just me. I did just say that we're having technology issues at my page, and there we go. Adrian, we can't hear you. You're sort of in and out and fuzzy. No. Excellent. Abed, I'll move on to you on this one. Upskilling, reskilling. Thank you. Dr. Paul knows a lot on this subject. I know a lot of the audience are very sort of keen on this subject as well. What we are finding is, because the fight for talent is clearly challenging and talent shortages, companies are now looking within to upskill, reskill, and there is a genuine appetite for candidates as well to get into new areas and pivot into new career paths as well. So this from a synergy point of view should actually work quite well, and is an opportunity for companies to solve that problem around trying to compete for the same talent all the time, and ends up just being a cost related exercise in terms of who pays the most wins. Abed, I will come to you on this in terms of the tech space. We've seen this quite a lot. Again, your views on upskilling, reskilling, and then maybe some case studies of where you've seen it work quite successfully.
Yeah, absolutely. And besides the fact that, it's very prevalent in tech, I think even those outside of the tech industry should see these as a good opportunity as well, because it's quite clear that tech really has driven a lot of businesses to move outside of the traditional way, and it's in the forefront of many businesses, whether you're tech or non-tech. And because of that, it's really important that you're able to reskill and upskill the people that you have. And this is incredibly important because, first and foremost, it helps as well with talent retention. We talk about that talent retention piece at the very start of our conversation today. If you're able to upskill and reskill your people internally, what you're doing is you're creating a strong talent brand, essentially. Right? Because now employees, and you're going to be known for a company that wants to help your people to learn new skills and to improve as well the company's performance. And so that's incredibly important. From a talent attraction piece, that's also very, very good, because it can be very difficult in some functions to find candidates. Some of these candidates perhaps may have never existed. For example, I work with a lot of e-commerce who are building units of anti-fraud, and specifically anti-fraud related to e-commerce use cases. There's really no one doing that at all in Indonesia, very, very little, right? But with the right foundational skills, you're able to find the people. So upskilling and reskilling is really important from a talent attraction as well as retention piece, as well as a talent brand point of view.
Yeah, 100%. And Dr. Paul, I'll give you an opportunity at some stage to come in on this as well. So I know it's an area of particular interest for you. And again, your views on that topic.
Yeah, no, sure, absolutely. Well, the first thing is, having been an HR director, there are always tensions around this, right? Because why would you spend money on retraining people if they're going to leave? Yeah, there's always this tension, So there's always, it's not straightforward. The other thing is, and actually you mentioned it at the panel that the last panel that we shared on the platform, that oftentimes companies are locked into offering, let's call it, the standard list of training programs. Every year they come out with the training directory. I'm never quite sure how often these are updated, by the way. So a lot of what's offered actually is not really that relevant for the future. If anything, it's sort of driving behavior backwards. So I think HR has to be much more future oriented, much more agile, and even the spend per person, right? Rather than looking at overall budget, maybe think about personal budgets, maybe giving people personal budgets, personal training budgets, capped, to allow people to explore the potentials that they want to explore, yeah, rather than the predetermined ones that the company thinks they ought to have. So, and then talented people will feel like you're giving them room to experiment and grow, right? And that can be really, really helpful for retention.
It is. It's probably the most common thing we see. The frustration from an HR from a budget point of view. They would love to invest more in more creative programs, but are tied by budgets, or companies overselling their training and development programs to get talent and then not delivering on that promise, leading to then that retention issue as well. So, but there's the bespoke nature of training and development is the key, and that's what the market is telling us. The danger, as you say, is you train somebody up and then somebody else takes them, which isn't just an Indonesia problem.
But hey, no, it's not. And the upside of that, of course, is that people talk when they leave, don't they? The best way of looking after your reputation, right, is treating people well before they leave and during the process of leaving. Even if you can get that right, with exit interviews and so on, it all helps, even if you do leave them, because some of these pools of talent, they circle around as well, right? They circle around. They might go away, but they might come back having gained some other experience. So I think maintaining your reputation that while you were there, you actually helped them grow. It is a good thing. It can come back. It can come back to help you in the future, for future selection.
It may do. You just got to be aware you might not get a thank you when they leave, but when they come back, they will certainly thank you for what you gave them 4 years before. But
there you go. Well, you get that as well, right?
You've got to have patience and a sense of humour with these things. But yes. I agree. The exit interview process is also something we work quite close with companies on, because that the whole social media influence of when people leave, and human nature is to complain rather than promote. Is something which does stick in people's minds, and most candidates these days will look at the social media behind a company before they make a final decision. So it is important.
Right.
Adrian, I think we have you back.
I'm back now at a very weird angle as I switch devices, but hopefully you can hear me all right. I think thanks so much for the panel discussion so far. Let's go ahead and address some of the questions that the audience has submitted. Some are quick ones, some are maybe a little bit more discussion is needed. One of the ones that has come through quite a bit is around the profile of the people that were participants in the survey. Really happy to say it's a very wide spectrum. So you've seen a few times throughout the presentation today that we've shown you across different industries, different age groups, different levels of seniority. So highly represented across various different types of companies. Not pinpointed to one type, very represented across industries and levels of seniority and age groups. So if you have any further questions around that, please don't hesitate to reach out on that. One of them was about 85% citing the reason to looking at resigning over the next few months being that big change. There's a question around, what does that mean? When we talk about big change, it's not simply same job at a different company. It's, I want to change the type of work that I do. I want to change the industry I'm in. I want to change my role. So we talk about big professional change. That's what we're talking about. So what I'd love to have a bit of a conversation though around is what, when we talk about company culture and values, what does that actually mean to candidates? When they talk about company culture and values, what do we think that actually means to them? And what are the things that stand out? Or maybe we can dig a little bit deeper within that and talk about DE&I specifically. What does DE&I mean to people? Is it the DE&I that stands out more, or maybe it's something else entirely? Well, that's one of the questions that has come through.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because I think Matthew's asked the question around how far can you go with this in Indonesia with the obvious constraints around it. And when we talk to a lot of people around this. So if candidates are asking the question about DE&I during a process, there needs to be an answer. But at the same time, I have sympathy for companies where, again, they're not quite sure what they can say, what they can't say, without getting themselves into tricky territory from an Indonesian sort of cultural point of view. and this will be very interesting to watch over the next few years as that generation comes through towards leadership positions, who clearly do have a desire to have an open workforce and an open platform to be who you want to be rather than constrained. Companies who are now seeing that as a normal way of being are very easy to hire. So rather than making it a big point of difference that you can have a small voice, those companies who just enable people to have that sort of normality attached to whatever their beliefs are finding talent easier to attract. Where clearly there are some challenges. We recently had Pride Day, and most countries around the region were very big on this in social media and everything else. That Indonesia, we were still constrained in terms of what we felt we could say and what we couldn't say, because clearly you have to be respective of that. But I think a point of difference companies can make internally, they don't need to make a big show about it externally, but internally there is a lot of opportunity around giving people at all levels a voice and almost passing it to them in terms of what they would like to see, rather than, again, senior people trying to tread around a subject they're not too familiar with or too keen to be quoted or misquoted on, which we've seen a lot happen. So we've seen D&I committees quite regularly set up in companies where the intent, the desire, the terminology is what's discussed and then presented to a more senior leadership group to approve rather than debate. And so, proactive areas like that. And these are things to talk about in an interview process when attracting talent. We do have D&I platforms, committees, which are represented at all levels. So you don't need to wait for 5 years before you get invited onto it. We have new starters as part of that. And these are the kind of things that, again, create that ecosystem, which eventually will create the change, which I think a lot of people are hoping for.
Yep. Another question that's come through is around the sample size of the survey. So we were just short of 2,000. So pretty healthy sample and representative of more than just Jakarta. So metropolitan centers across Indonesia. Interesting thing here about hybrid work. Elon Musk uses the phrase pretend to work. Any views on relative productivity?
I sent this across our senior leadership group and got a terrible response that I was representing Elon Musk's views. I was generally saying that this might be relevant, it might come up to a client base, and I got given all kinds of abuse. Having said that, what he is saying is I think generally felt by a lot of people. But how he's communicated it and who is communicating is probably the wrong side of things. But back to what we talked about, hybrid working and that productivity piece, there are clearly ways to encourage people to come back to the office from a performance point of view, which is related to their own success and their own career paths, rather than wide sweeping statements and stereotyping.
Yeah, I think the other thing here is that you need the data. The research needs to be done, and it is being done, right? It's about to be done in the UK. There's going to be a scientific study of the impacts of going down to a 4-day week on productivity. Mm-hmm. So, I think we need some harder data rather than just guesswork. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think to be fair, the candidate market understands that, and they're not necessarily looking for a definitive answer. They're looking for some understanding and some flexibility rather than this is our policy, because that's impossible to say right now.
Yeah.
So another question here around 68% of people being willing to sacrifice salary for personal happiness, and notably, we said that's remuneration is the number one driver in joining a new company. So there's obviously a bit of an interesting tension between those two, and I think maybe Ollie, that comes back to looking at this maybe a bit more laterally and not as literally. So when 68% of people say that they're willing to sacrifice money for happiness, does it mean that 68% of people will? Probably not, right? But it means that it's important enough to them to answer yes.
Yeah, I arrived in Jakarta yesterday, and the first thing I was told, three people have resigned, and they've all taken 30 to 40% pay increases. I was like, okay, what can you do about that? So I think, welcome to my world.
Well, go on, Ollie. Go on.
As a headhunter, you get zero sympathy for this because clearly we're part of the problem. But when it happens to us, no one wants to listen. But it is. So that number is not inaccurate in terms of, that 64% will definitely sacrifice salary for personal well-being. It's all part of the ecosystem you're trying to develop to make it harder for people to leave rather than stop them leaving, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The other thing that I would say is that, personal happiness is different for every person. I mean, I'm talking about the definition of happiness. What makes people happy is different for everyone. And that comes back to diversity in personal values. So I think aggregate data is fantastic, and it's been superb today because it gives you some real steers to where you need to dig deeper. But we shouldn't forget that people are unique at the end of the day. They're unique. Yeah. And understanding that uniqueness in someone is a leadership responsibility, right? It's a leadership responsibility to understand that uniqueness.
Agreed. And where we see HR working in synergy, we're seeing a leadership around more regular catch-ups, individual catch-ups around motivations rather than performance.
Exactly.
Is the way forward on this topic, and make it an individual thing, as you say, Paul, rather than just a wide sweeping thing. But what appraisals once or twice a year are no longer the way forward.
Correct.
And I think perhaps one of the key themes that underpins that topic is this idea of leading with empathy. That empathy is not a broad stroke view. It has to be on an individual level, right? All right, so listen, that brings us to the end of today's webinar. We weren't able to get to all the questions. We'll, of course, take some time to look at the questions you've asked, and we will be sending some responses to them back to everybody. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We hope you found some value in this data. The full report is available in both English and Bahasa for the first time. So, and what you've seen today is maybe 10 to 15% tip of the iceberg of the data that's in the report. So we certainly urge you to reach out for a copy if you don't have one already. There's a lot more to read about. So thank you again to all the panelists for participating, and thank you so much to Bertram for hosting us today.
And Adrian, on behalf of the Human Capital and Education Group members, thanks to you, Ollie, and the rest of the team for deep diving, because unless we do, we're sort of grasping in the dark. Yeah. So thank you so much for illuminating some of those key points, and more to be able to follow on from now. So thank you very much.